So we came up with a bunch of names, and then a friend of mine who's a branding expert and has a lot of big company media experience texted me at like 3 a.m, and it just said Rough Draft Atlanta. So I woke up probably not many hours after that and was able to register the URL. And so
this is Small Press Big Ideas, a podcast about the business of local news in the United States. I'm your host, Paul Gewirtz. Small Press Big Ideas is about the opportunities and challenges that local news publishers are facing for their businesses. I'll sit down and talk with journalists, entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, and more in the local news industry to find out what's working, what isn't, and how the local news ecosystem can innovate and flourish in the 21st century. Okay, today on the podcast, I am joined by Keith Pepper. Keith is the publisher at Rough Draft Atlanta, which was named the best local and community newsletter by the Publisher Newsletter Awards 2024. And Rough Draft serves a number of different neighborhoods, communities in the Atlanta, Georgia area, from what I understand. So, Keith, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Just kind of like with all my guests, could you just give us a quick bio in your own words on your kind of life and career, how you've gotten to Rough Draft at this point?
Well, yeah, thanks for having me today. I'm an Atlanta native. I grew up in a media-obsessed house, meaning that every morning we got 3 newspapers delivered to our driveway in print. So Atlanta had a morning paper called the Atlanta Constitution. We got the Wall Street Journal. Then we got USA Today. And so I personally was so into the news and the media that I personally subscribed to the afternoon paper at the time, the Atlanta Journal. So I was just, all in on media, particularly radio. So I talked my way into a job at WSB Radio, which was a 50,000 watt clear channel AM news station in Atlanta, owned at the time by Cox, and talked my way into a job, an internship there when I was 16 years old. So worked all through high school, all through college, a little bit after college at the radio station. So that's planted the seeds of me being, into media.
That's kind of a trend I've seen on the podcast. A lot of people, it goes like way back to like childhood, that interest in the news and everything. I don't know that I've known anybody that got 3 papers or even maybe 4 papers a day to the house.
That's right. Definitely not something that exists
anymore.
Yeah.
No.
I own a newspaper company and don't get any papers really delivered. So
I wouldn't call myself newspaper or media obsessed or anything, but I do have very fond memories of like the Sunday Denver Post back in the day when I was growing up, and just all the cool, like the comics and color on Sundays and the whole huge sports section and like all the different, it was great.
Yeah.
It's just not a thing that there is, and it's unfortunately probably not coming back, not in that way, at least.
Not in that way. Yeah. I spent a long time living in New York, and, I think part of my personality was every weekend carrying the New York Times, the Sunday Times, half of which was delivered on Saturday. Just carrying that around from brunch place to brunch place through the weekends. But yeah, certainly not a model that's still going.
No, it paints a picture though. That's great. So could you tell us what led you up to buying Rough Draft Atlanta? Like what things came together for that to happen or to spark that seed in your mind?
Yeah. So I was living in New York for 20 years and working at some technology startups. And the last one I worked at was a company called Outbrain, which is a digital ad network, the content recommendation space. So I had been traveling a lot internationally, and was ready just for personal reasons to get back to Atlanta for family reasons. And so was able to work out a situation where I was basically living in Atlanta for a year and a half and commuting between New York and Atlanta. And then when I left Outbrain at the end of Q3 in 2019, I was really looking for something to do that would be more local, just get me off of traveling internationally and be more engaged in the community. I had sort of felt for many years that Atlanta was becoming really interesting, becoming more interesting. And I felt like New York was kind of becoming less interesting in a way. So I was ready to be here and be engaged in the community. And I started looking at small businesses to get involved with. And I got introduced to a guy who was selling this group of local newspapers. And I hadn't worked directly in media in a long time. And I just started talking to him, and all of that passion from when I was a kid started bubbling up again. And I got really interested in this opportunity to buy a group of local community newspapers that was for sale. This was in early 2020, so it was in January of 2020, before the pandemic. So we started talking, and I got, just kept getting interested, but it just seemed a little bit of a crazy idea. Anyway, the pandemic happened, and so we hit pause, and I felt like I'd really dodged a bullet and just, moved on. And we stayed in touch, and midsummer of 2020, we started talking again. And, there was the same passion that I had before, was really, became alive in me again. So then I went to some friends and I said, like, this is a crazy idea. Can you please talk me out of this? And friends who I had known for 40 years, friends who I had known for 4 months, they all said the same thing. They said, seems like a great idea. You've got, you're the person to do this. And so I was able to, this was 2020. So, needless to say, there weren't a lot of people lining up to buy local newspapers at that time. So I was able to, I think, get a really fair and good deal on the way in. And so in December 2020, we closed the deal, and I suddenly owned a group of local newspapers.
It's a great story. I just want to touch on a couple of things you said. First of all, when you're talking about Atlanta becoming more and more interesting, just anecdotally, I have no connection to Atlanta at all, but I've noticed in the last, 4 or 5 years, it just pops up more and more and more. Even like from everything to the big mega, like my wife and I went on this thing during the pandemic where we watched like all the Marvel movies, and they're all like filmed in Georgia, and just like in media in general, it just seems if you can feel like a buzz coming from the region, even though I have no like relation to it. So that's interesting. You say that you saw that too as like a native of the area.
Yeah. Well, there's one of my friends owns a company, and they're one of their main products is a T-shirt that says Atlanta influences everything. So whether it's music, movies, culture, certainly Black culture, hip hop, then Atlanta is there, corporate, civic, and also political lately. So, certainly in the 2020 election, you saw, the Senate swing on Georgia. So.
That's right. That was Georgia. I remember that, but I didn't make that connection. Yeah. And then also what you're saying about kind of getting a deal or getting, good conditions on buying it in 2020, just on my end, different, I didn't buy a business, but we moved to a new town in late, like December 2019, and sold my old house in February in the Denver area. And then the pandemic hit right when we're about to close on this house that I'm sitting in right now. And at the time, I kind of feel your apprehension, because I was like, is the entire market going to tank, like the home values and these mortgage rates and everything? And like looking back on it now, I'm like, well, that was a no-brainer in hindsight. Like how home values have gone. So, I mean, kind of, not really the same thing, but similar. I feel your emotion on that one of like, oh, that actually worked out very well.
Yeah.
It was a very uncertain time, but good move. So what did it wasn't called Rough Draft Atlanta when you bought the organization, right?
Yeah. I bought a company that was at the time, it was over 98% print revenue. So very much focused on these community newspapers that we continue to produce, that are printed and distributed monthly, and they're targeted geographically at different neighborhoods. And so each of the papers had its own identity as a print paper for that community. And so the company itself had a name that wasn't even really a public facing name that people knew. And then digitally, there were 3 different websites that sort of loosely, mapped to the different papers. So it was very confusing from a branding perspective. And I come, with a marketing background. And so thinking about how to present it to the community was really one of the biggest challenges, because I think we had like, I think I counted like 13 or 14 different logos floating around. And, one community had this color logo, the other community had a different color logo. So there wasn't really a lot of branding cohesiveness. So that was certainly one of the things that I wanted to tackle early on, was figuring out how do we make, a brand that will scale a little bit geographically, but also just makes it easier for us to communicate who we are.
That's great. So that really kind of explains where the Rough Draft Atlanta came from.
So Rough Draft came from the way that we came up with Rough Draft is we were launching a newsletter that was going to be a new product. So there wasn't
I see.
a newsletter that was kind of pan-geographic or geographically agnostic for Metro Atlanta. And, that would be a new brand to introduce in a way that we could grow it locally. So we came up with a bunch of names, and then a friend of mine who's a branding expert and has a lot of big company media experience texted me at like 3 a.m, and it just said Rough Draft Atlanta. So I woke up probably not many hours after that and was able to register the URL. And so that's how we came up with Rough Draft, which, I think it's sort of forward looking. It is something that looks pretty cool on merch, and it also gives us plausible deniability when we have typos or mistakes, because we're moving very fast and that happens. So
fits into the brand, right? Perfect.
Yeah. And then then a play on the, that journalism is the first draft, or rough draft of history.
Right.
There's a couple of ways that it maps in there. Yeah.
So that answers my question about kind of the branding and everything, but kind of digging into that a little more. When you came on board and bought the group of newspapers, what did the organization look like when you came in terms of organizational structure, like business viability? Like, how is it doing? Like, and what kind of changes did you have to make when you came in? Was there any glaringly obvious things, or just broad strokes? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so there was both. I mean, there were glaringly obvious things that I did, like get rid of the office, get rid of the phone system, get rid of the fax machine.
Wow.
Yeah. Get rid of the phone. There was literally a phone system with like extensions in different places, and people hadn't been to the office in over a year. And that, between the office and some, technology that they really didn't need, it was about $8,000 a month in expense that we were able to immediately just cut out, which for a small business was pretty meaningful. There was a big office that just wasn't really necessary, or because of COVID wasn't being used. So those are the obvious things I did early on. I mean, at the time when I bought the company, there were 3 full-time editorial people, a handful of freelancers. There were 3 full-time salespeople, and then 1 sort of creative/tech person, and 1 office manager that we had because there was an office back at the time. So I didn't make any changes to start. I mean, I was very, probably a lesson learned is I did not want to come in and make a bunch of changes. I wanted people to feel like we were just carrying on as we were. So we made some easy technology changes, like moving over to Google Workspace, which took out a ton of complexity and also just made it a lot easier for me to be the person that was able to handle all the tech stuff. We pretty quickly moved the website over to Newspack. So we were operating 3 different CMSs, 3 different ad servers, 3 different URLs for the different groups of, subgroups of papers. So we quickly moved over to Newspack, which has been a big win for us. We now have 0 technology people on the team. All of that is outsourced to Newspack. The website is fast, it's modern, it's mobile friendly. It gets all the current, all the upgrades just, happen immediately. So that was a big change that I made. So that was what we did early on. Didn't really make a lot of staffing changes at first, and we've since turned over not the whole staff. We still have some people that have been with us the whole time. So that's been great for continuity. But I think you learn as you go. I was a first time entrepreneur, and so you learn as you go that the changes that you think you should make, you probably should follow your gut and listen to them. And that was a lesson that I learned, and none of which were major issues, but certainly as when I talk to people about what did I learn early on, I think trusting your gut on what you should do around staffing and changes that you want to make at the beginning is something that I learned.
Did you face a lot of not challenges, but I don't know how long the existing staff were there, but did you face any kind of backlash from that? People, it's hard to change when you've been doing something one way a long time. And
it's
to me,
hey, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, to me, I love G Suite and stuff. It's a no brainer. But if you're used to using something else for a decade or more, I don't know how long the people were there. I could see how it's like challenging to make that. So yeah,
we could write a book about the technology challenges. I mean, early on, I had one of the old timer call me and say that Gmail was broken. They were so unhappy that we had made this change over to the through the Google Workspace, they told me that Gmail was broken, and I had to assure them that Gmail was broken. It would be the top story
I
on
think
the
they've got
worldwide.
people. They've got
Yeah,
people on that. I
yeah.
think
So
some smart people.
yeah, I mean, so there's that. There was certainly like some resistance there. I mean, it was not a very digitally savvy team, just wasn't what they were. It was a newspaper company, and so there was a big learning curve there. I mean, anecdotally, I think to just demonstrate sort of what we were dealing with, like they hadn't posted on Instagram in over 5 years when I was looking at doing due diligence, and I asked them like, what was the strategy? Because surely there was a strategy around that, and they said that they had an intern who had set up the password, and they left, and so they lost the password, and so that was the digital DNA. And so there's been a big shift. I mean, we've gone our whole strategy has gone from being a print first newspaper company to becoming a digital first media company, and so we've had to shift that way. But there were some hilarious anecdotes, just around the technology transition early on, for sure.
That's great. And it's funny what you're kind of saying about being not resistant to change, but it being difficult. I just interviewed this week Chris Cruson from Lion Publishers. He's the executive director of Lion Publishers. And one of his big takeaways was that people and organizations need to get used to change, especially with the way tech's going now. So that kind of echoes that. You just have to be used to not that it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just things are changing rapidly. So it's just a good skill to get used to in an organization or just in general.
Right. That's on steroids with the newspaper industry in particular.
Yes.
Especially if you're print, if you're a print company, there's just your whole world has changed. So, I'm sensitive to that, but it also just meant that there was a ton of opportunity for us to grow. But certainly that wasn't as easy as you would think, or maybe not think, I guess.
That's great for the transition over. So that leads me perfectly into what's the org look like today? Like in terms of the team, the setup, what the products look like. Everything's fully remote. It sounds like from a
we're remote, and we've got some shared workspaces.
Okay.
We rent a small, like a desk in a small little office just so we can kind of keep papers and stuff there. But we generally work remote. I mean, we've spent the biggest change has been that we've gone from 3 full-time journalists when I bought the company in 2020 to 7 full-time now. So we've added a lot. We've invested a lot in the editorial, in the content space. We have no tech folks, just meaning that we do everything through Newspack. We get all of our support through that, or through, 1 or 2 other consultants that help us with things like newsletters, and some traffic acquisition, website stuff. But we got like 5.5 salespeople, and I count myself as the half. There, we transitioned. The office manager has moved into sales, so we've really taken their skills and just pushed them into learning how to sell, because that's what we really need to keep just keep growing on the revenue side. So
that's great. So I'll shift gears just a little bit here, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, but you and I in our initial conversation talked about just kind of the fragmented neighborhood coverage in Atlanta, and this kind of goes for any major metro, and how I love your organization through Newspack. I should get Newspack as a sponsor with how much we're talking them up here today. Just how you can pull it down like on the side, from what I remember, on your site and see all the different neighborhoods and it's just such easy navigation and everything. I was wondering if you could just speak on that, kind of just in general terms, what you've seen with focusing on individual neighborhoods and how maybe it works together to have one kind of cohesive area to cover them all. I'm not sure what I'm trying to spit out here, but I think you get that.
I mean, Atlanta's a city of neighborhoods, and I think that traditionally the print products, and still with the print products, they're very siloed. They go to just one neighborhood. They're mailed to those neighborhoods. If you live in Dunwoody, for example, which is a suburb, you would never know that there's also a paper in Atlanta, or in a different neighborhood, just because that's just not how we do the distribution. So we had to think of a way to scale both on the content side and the staffing side, in a way to distribute the content in a way that made sense. So we still have the papers that go to the individual communities, and those have their own cover on the front. And in each one of those if you live in Dunwoody, you're going to get a paper that says the Dunwoody Reporter from Rough Draft on the front. And if you live in Tucker, you're going to get a paper that says Tucker Reporter from Rough Draft on the front of your paper. But what we've done is we've both digitally and in the print product on the inside is we've really consolidated into having one product. And so what I mean by that is that if we're writing a restaurant story about one neighborhood, that we think that story is now interesting to people in other neighborhoods, because you're likely to get in your car and drive to go eat at that place. And so that wasn't always how the product was approached in the past. It was very much like the Dunwoody paper was curated just for Dunwoody. And not only was that really time consuming and complex to produce on the print side, but it didn't make sense as a way to scale because of the example I just gave you about the restaurants. And so we think of, on the website, you can go to the website and you can go to the Dunwoody category, and that's going to give you stories only about Dunwoody. But we think that, there's a lot of crossover. So because Atlanta is not a news desert, parts of Atlanta are certainly parts of their demographic groups that aren't served by enough media. There are geographies that aren't served by enough media. But there's 3 TV affiliates here. There's, a handful of radio stations. There's a bunch of independent news sites like us. There's nonprofit news sites. There's a big daily metro paper. So there's a lot of information that's out there. So we're trying to find our lane and figure out, where we fit in that continuum of covering everything from local government on one side to arts, culture, and food on the other. So long way to answer that question, but the neighborhood fragmentation, there's people want to know what's happening in their immediate neighborhood, and we're still able to give that to them, mostly through the website and through newsletters. Not, in the print paper, the print product, because it's monthly, has really morphed into being kind of a lean back, almost magazine experience.
Okay, so you're talking about the print product. What are your channels right now? You obviously have the digital. We were just talking about your site with Newspack. Looks really nice. I know obviously you have newsletters. You're winning awards for it. And then the print product. Is that it? Have you stepped up like a social media game or anything like that? I mean, it couldn't be much worse than what it was when you bought the places from what it sounds like.
Yeah, we've definitely stepped up social media. We just passed 21,000 Instagram followers. We've done a good job of consolidating all of our social. So at the time, just like I explained, we had 3 websites. There were probably 3 or 4 different social media handles. So we've consolidated all of that into Rough Draft Atlanta. Any promotion that we do, anything we sponsor, we're rallying around the Rough Draft Atlanta brand. So, other than the papers going out, having the individual neighborhood names on them, all the digital marketing, all the digital branding is around Rough Draft Atlanta. So that's really important for us to do. I mean, it's easier to do. It makes, even though I don't think I did a great job of explaining it, it makes the talk track a lot easier around, what we're doing. So to me, that's really important. That's another thing that took some change, right? Because people had, internally, people had allegiances. They had grown up working at, one of the papers and not the other. So that's been something that we've had to, as a team, just keep reiterating, that you work for Rough Draft Atlanta, and we brand everything that we do now.
Right.
Draft. So yeah. So the channels, I mean, there's print, which is, still 80% of our revenue comes from print. So that's a big thing for us. We focus on every month. Our goal is to have the best free print product in the community, which I think we do. We spend a lot of money producing it. It's newsprint, but it's high quality. It's stapled. It's what's called trimmed. It's mailed through direct mail to communities. So big revenue driver for us, but also a big expense. We have print, and then we have, which is pretty self-explanatory, just, all ad supported. The
Right.
product's free. And then on digital, we've got our website, we've got social, and we've got our newsletters. So those are the three channels there.
That's great. And that, I was just setting myself up for my next question, really, too. Let's talk newsletters. I feel like that's all I talk about lately on the podcast. I mean, it's obvious. I have my own newsletter, because everybody has newsletters these days. And I recently featured a story. It's just like a curated newsletter. I recently featured a story from, I think, Neiman Lab, or maybe Pointer, I don't know. that says I think 95% of news publishers are utilizing newsletters now. And it's just a great business model. So, and you've gone from literally buying a company that lost their, Instagram password to, winning awards for best local and community newsletter. So I'd love just to get your kind of take on newsletters. I've said newsletter a lot in the last minute there.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
but yeah.
Well, I'm very bullish on the channel. I'm very bullish on the distribution. I think that newsletters are, just a really effective way to create a habit with people. So I come, back, if you rewind to my radio background. So I started, I produced the morning show at the top news station in Atlanta. And, if you listen to any radio morning show or watch the Today Show or any morning program, you'll notice a pattern. They're the exact same format every day of the week, right? So you can set your clock by knowing if the traffic is on, you're late, or if the sports is on, you're running ahead of time.
Right.
So to me, creating a morning newsletter, which we didn't have, and there really wasn't one in Atlanta at the time. This was pre-Axios coming to Atlanta. There were a bunch of publishers that were sending out like headlines and just like automated, here are the day's headlines kind of emails, but there wasn't like a personality driven morning brew for Atlanta. And so we launched that. I created it kind of for an audience of one. So I was, new back, I'm from Atlanta, but I was new here and I wanted to, have something that I thought would be a one-stop shop. If you have 3 or 4 minutes, like here's what you need to know. And so we started Rough Draft. We actually started it originally 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, which I knew was a terrible idea, but to get the team bought in, because the team was like, what are you talking about? And for me, so we started out Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then pretty quickly we went to 5 days a week, and now we're actually doing 6 days a week. So I knew that there has to be consistency to when it's sent, consistency to what's in it, consistency to how it looks. So we've been pretty vigilant about that, but we've got a formula. It's the newsletter is the new morning paper. So if you remember back to when I was walking to the driveway to get 3 newspapers every day, that doesn't happen anymore, right? People roll over, they open their phone, and they probably get 2 or 3 newsletters. Every day they may get. I know I get 4 daily local newsletters, and including ours, but I also get a handful of, weekly or every other week, more industry newsletters or probably B2B newsletters. So it's really important for me to set that habit. And I think we really captured, I think people have been very supportive of what we're doing. I think we put out a really good product and that it's clean. It's, we call it clever, curated, and concise. And so, it's got the emojis, which, we didn't invent emojis, but for whatever reason, people really like.
Yeah, they're fun.
They really like the format. Yeah. And, and so our goal is we send out every day at 7. We've got a formula down, a programming schedule down rather. So every Monday we do global headlines in partnership with a local organization. Every Monday we do podcast recommendations. Every Tuesday we do volunteer opportunities. Every Wednesday we do concerts. Thursday's food. Friday we do sports and movie review and our top stories. And Saturdays we do the quiz. And so you kind of know what to program. And so one of the reasons that's important is because it sets a habit for people. You tell them what to expect, and they get that, and they set their schedule by it. The other reason it's important is because for the team internally, it allows for some organization around how we do it. Because a lot of the days can kind of be programmed ahead of time. So, we know, we could probably do the concerts for the next month, and have those ready to go. So it creates a little bit easier of a process in terms of production. And then it just gives us a great opportunity for advertisers, because it's been a big revenue driver for us to sell as a unique product, but just a really effective, nimble, elegant way for advertisers to get into the inbox, which is a pretty intimate place to be at 7:00 every morning.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I don't subscribe to many newsletters, but the reason I am so bullish, it's like a podcast. Once you get somebody, they are hooked. I mean, I sit down with my coffee first thing every morning, and I go through my the Pod News website. It's a podcast industry. The Pod News newsletter, I'm sorry. And it's great. It's so personalized. It's that feeling of getting the paper in the morning. And it's got the personality, like you said. So
Yeah. It's like a morning show. I mean, I think of it like it's a morning show for your inbox. So,
and it creates a ritual, right?
Creates a ritual, right? So people they know where they are when they're reading rough draft. They're doing it whether it's over coffee, when they're walking the dog, whatever they're on the Peloton, whatever they're doing, they know that they're reading it there. And so, we try to make it so that it's almost like a self-contained newsletter. Like you don't really have to, we don't just put in it's not clickbaity. So it's like, you could read the newsletter and you can know what's going on without clicking out. But if you want to go deeper, you can go deeper. And it's not meant to be doom and gloom. We want to make the news. We want people to read the news. There's a lot of stress in the world, and there's a lot of bad news. And we certainly report, what we think is the important stuff. But obviously, we're curating it to a certain extent. So we have some editorial control.
That's awesome. I've got a guy coming on the podcast, and we had like a pre-record call, and he said you can't give people just vegetables. He's like, you got to have a little dessert in there too. It's kind of echoes what you said, not all doom and gloom. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, that was, Jim Brady does a much more elegant way of explaining this, but that's why newspapers were so, in the heyday of newspapers, people were reading it every morning for the sports and the horoscopes and the weather. And then on Sundays, you would get that, deep investigation. But it wasn't, businesses weren't built on, everyday investigative news. That's just not a realistic business model.
So for somebody maybe looking to start a newsletter strategy, a publisher, or, maybe want to up their game because you've done great work. Did you start with something very simple in terms of format and then kind of iterate and add on to it? Because you said you have like a pretty good like template or kind of, pattern for the newsletter. But how did it start? Did it start with just like a couple of headlines and then like you expanded? And did you play with it? Did you take notes from like, The Hustle, I think you mentioned, or somebody like that? Or how did the evolution of that come about?
Yeah, I mean, the evolution is real simple. We looked at the Morning Brew and the Hustle.
Morning Brew, maybe that's the one you mentioned.
Yeah, and the Skim, and then we just copied it without being blatantly copying it. So I think which is what everyone's iterating on. I mean, I've seen our ad format show up in other local newsletters in Atlanta. So it's not, there's no, no one's got a patent on the newsletter design. So I think that in the Hustle and Morning Brew, I think put their business plan on their website. So I encourage everyone to take a look at it. I think you've got to really commit the team to understanding the value of that consistency. So I don't know if, every market, what depending on what your team looks like and what the competitive landscape looks like, if it needs to be an everyday newsletter. But we've also had a lot of success with vertical newsletters that go out once a week. So, we do an art newsletter, we do one for seniors, we do one for film. So we're looking at ways to build those affinity groups or vertical targeting, because those are great audiences. They're smaller than our other ones, but our food newsletter, for example, which goes out once a week, probably will expand to twice a week pretty soon. And that's got a double-digit thousands in growing. And so that's an area where, we can really, I think we've got a lot of opportunity to grow. So I think when if I'm talking to other publishers, I think you committing to it, looking at what you would want to read. I mean, I think the newsletter that we produce is probably a reflection of my personality and my aesthetics in a lot of ways. Like it's something that, I am proud to read. I think advertisers get a lot of value from it. So we decided early on, we're going to limit it in terms of ads. We're going to not have display ads in the newsletter. It's going to all be text. It's all going to be native text ads. And there's just great examples of people that are doing it at scale, way better, way bigger than we are doing it, where that works. And so I study the different ones. I look at, who's doing well, and we try to find ways that we can, take what they're doing and localize it. We're starting, I think the next thing we'll do is, a page from the Puck playbook, which I'm a big fan of what they do. And I think that's building around personalities. So we've got one of our writers who's now doing a weekly newsletter for the city that she covers. And so it's her weekly recap with like basically a paragraph or two of like her commentary, and then essentially like the top 5 stories from the week just put into our format. And just so you got to commit to it and you got to stick with it. I mean, the first one that we'll send to 10 people, but we're sending to 50,000, more than 50,000 people every day. So it's growing, and that becomes real meaningful revenue for us.
So I did want to touch on this other thing that you mentioned in our call, and you kind of spoke, and this is more from the business side. You talked about, which it's kind of something I never thought about, but it makes perfect sense. You talked about high value, low volume advertisers, I think is how you put it, and how you found success with your print, I believe with your print product, working with them. I was wondering if you could speak on that a bit, because I've just never heard it through that kind of framing before, and I really liked it.
Sure. I mean, if we go back to the newspaper, heyday, to date myself, but the newspaper industry there was a lot of revenue. I don't know the numbers, but you could find this around classifieds, right? Classifieds, very inexpensive ad product for people. Obviously, that all went away, pretty widely understood to be because of Craigslist, and then and then you layer in on top of that targeted advertising from Google and Facebook and other digital platforms to take the rest of the revenue after that.
Yeah, I just use Facebook Marketplace these days if I'm looking for this. What I would have 20 years ago is what I used the classifieds for. Yeah,
right. And so when I say high value, low volume, I'll flip it for a second. So somebody that needs direct response advertising, so a restaurant or a bar, right? They need a lot of people to come in. They're going to spend a relatively little amount of money per transaction, but they need volume for people to come in. To get that volume, they can get a reach, and a much more targeted reach, on something like Facebook or Instagram, other social, TikTok, much cheaper than they can get through a print newspaper that's mailed out monthly. But when we think about where we're valuable for people as a advertising vehicle, it's around people that have few transactions, but there is a high transaction value and a high lifetime value. So if you think about real estate agents, real estate brokers, right? They get one client from an ad, just one client a year from that ad. The lifetime value of that client probably pays for that ad 5 times over. So that's what I mean by that. So we look for, I think we have a better in print. We've got a great product. In fact, one of the best, I think, in the market for people that have that type of business, that are looking for people that have a relatively high lifetime value. I mean, another way to say this is just like top of the funnel. It's the
right.
Classic top of the funnel branding, advertising. That's where we're better. If you need that high, if you need the high volume, we have very few. We have one restaurant, I think, that advertises in our paper right now, just because there's so many other places for them to get value. Now we give that restaurant is clearly getting value because they've been an advertiser for a long time. But the future of print advertising is not in that model. It's in that example I gave, the more top of the funnel. So I think it's just a fancy way probably of me, it's just saying top of funnel advertising. But we've created, I think, in our newsletters in particular, and our website continues to get better and better and growing, is through, it's by creating products that can be more accessible to small businesses. So we've got text ads in our newsletter. We've got a digital display way that we sell through share of voice that really works with any budget. So we're working on providing better products for small advertisers, just probably not going to be in print.
Yeah, I think that's a great model for any local publisher to look at, is just that kind of the top of funnel way you were looking at it. One example that comes to mind that I saw not too long ago, I think it was either on Reddit or just in a marketing group I'm on in LinkedIn. I don't remember what it was. And I think it was a marketing group. I don't even know what it was. And it was from somebody in the DC area. And it's like, one of the funny things about living in DC is you'll see these ads that's probably aimed at one person on the subway. And it was like literally next to a bench in a subway station. And it's this Lockheed Martin ad for like a component on a jet engine, like the most specific thing. I'm like, there's probably one person at the Pentagon that makes that decision, and this is on their commute, and it's worthwhile for them. Like, talk about a classic example of that,
Yeah. I mean, DC is filled with examples like that around the lobby.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see it, if you look at some of the national newsletters, if you get any of the national newsletters, like whether it's Puck or the Axios products that are targeted towards, the more professional audiences. I mean, you see that exactly there. I mean, it's classic too with like Hollywood advertising around the awards season. And I've heard that same example locally here in Atlanta with billboards where, an agency will make sure that they put a billboard, by the CEOs on the CEO's commute.
Of course.
And certainly I think that because of our audience, because we've got a pretty, our papers go to some of the most affluent and influential zip codes in Atlanta. We've benefited from that as well because our print product is mailed into these homes. It's a nice looking product, high quality print. So it's coming into the houses. And so, we've certainly benefited from CEOs, telling their marketing people about our product. So I don't discount that at all as an important thing to think about.
I think we've touched on everything. I need to watch myself with not just you, with every guest, and not turning this into a podcast about newsletters, because I feel like it's all I've been talking about lately, and I'm bullish on it as well.
Well, at least we didn't talk about AI, so I think
I didn't, which is rare because it usually comes up at some point.
Yeah.
But maybe that's a different conversation, I guess.
Yeah.
Is there anything I missed? Is there anything I missed that you wanted to talk about in this conversation?
I mean, I think that the other, we're constantly looking at how to evolve. I think of things as there's 4 buckets of revenue for publishers. So advertising, obviously being the biggest for us, subscriptions or membership being the other. And we're growing that, or we're looking at growing it. So it's less than 1% of our business right now. All of our content's free. We have no paywall. Our papers are free. Our newsletters are free, but we do have a membership program that we're dipping our toe in the water. And then the other 2, events is being probably the next most interesting thing to me. To do a couple of events in the next year. And then the 4th bucket, which we're not even close to, is something like merchandise. So whether that's books or t-shirts, that's something that we're not really looking at, but I do think it, someday may be interesting for us. But we're not on the podcast front. We are guests on podcasts. We have a partnership with the local NPR station. So one of our writers is a weekly guest on a segment around events and what to do that weekend. And then our food editor is a guest on several different podcasts and radio segments. So for me, that's a better way to do the audio piece. We just don't see a path to monetizing it at the current time.
Gotcha. If you ever want to talk about it, I know a guy. Just say it. Also, when you talked about the membership piece, what are the benefits that somebody would get from what does that look like, just out of curiosity?
So it's mostly, because we're for profit, so there's no tax benefit. So our benefits are swag. So we've got some pretty decent swag, and then just the feeling of supporting local media. So I think people like what we're doing. They either live in a neighborhood where they get the paper, or they've discovered our newsletter and our website, and they appreciate what we do and want to support local media. So right now, those are the benefits. I mean, I don't ever see a time when there's going to be a paywall, but I do see that we'll have like exclusive events for subscribers or for members down the road.
Something that comes to mind for me is, I'm sure you've heard the thing about how people love to see their names in print. Mm-hmm. I subscribe to that. I mentioned it before, the Pod News daily newsletter, and they have like at the bottom all the companies and then all the individuals that are monthly supporters of them, just like in kind of a block at the very bottom of the newsletter. And
I get that same newsletter with someone.
Oh, do you? Yeah, I really love his model of how he's built that out. I talked about it with a previous guest.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of cool stuff on the monetization front and the sponsorship.
Yes, yeah. Awesome, Keith. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. We've gone long. I could keep talking to you too. This is great. I could pick your brains on the newsletters all day for my own benefit, but I'll spare the audience. So just if you could tell people where people can find you and Rough Draft and anything else you'd like to promote or for me to link to in the show notes.
So our website is roughdraftatlanta.com. On social, we're Rough Draft ATL. I'm pretty active and happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Keith Pepper, or Keith at roughdraftatlanta.com.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Paul.
Thank you for listening to Small Press Big Ideas. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to help the show, the best thing you can do is to tell a friend or colleague and just take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to right now. It only takes a minute out of your day, but it really does help the podcast grow and reach more ears. check back for new episodes every Monday.